Oh my gosh, stop the recording. Okay, and we want to make sure that the closed caption is on. Okay, okay, that seems like it's on. Okay, well, welcome to the Journalism's Roundtable. My name is Richard Prince, and I write a online column called Journal-isms, journal-isms.com, on diversity issues in the news business. This roundtable is an extension of that. We started the roundtable in 1999 when a friend of ours was leaving to pursue a doctorate. She said, keep these going, and we have. We met every month in various locations, various restaurants in Washington, D.C., until the COVID epidemic. Uh, we just got our first person who saw the note on Facebook. We kept these in restaurants, various restaurants in Washington, D.C., until the COVID epidemic, when we switched to Zoom. Our participation multiplied, and we hope to have more roundtables that are hybrid, that is, meeting in person as well as on Zoom. We've had 4 of those so far. Now, a special welcome to those who tried to tried to reach us on Facebook and are now on Zoom. Hope there was no trouble for you. Uh, Please leave messages in the comments section, i.e., the chat room, if you want to reach us. We think of this as an online dinner party with the purpose to network and to learn. Some of the networking takes place in the chat room, so please feel free to use it. All comments are on the record, and we ask everyone to be respectful of other people's time. So please try to be succinct and to the point. The topic today is we refuse to be silent. Hold this up. We refuse to be silent. Women's voices on justice for Black men. A new collection edited by Dodson. And we have several of the contributors with us. So without further ado, I want to ask Angela to give us an overview of what the book is about, how she came to do this, and what we should hope to take away from it. So Angela, the floor is yours for 3 minutes.
The book is a collection of it. It says more than 35 women. Actually, it's more than 40 women. Not all of whom are Black. At least one I know is white. Somebody else might be mixed race or identify as mixed race. And I began work on this book, first of all, 10 years ago when Michael Brown died. There were conversations among people on Facebook and other social media, particularly women, mothers, talking about how we felt when all these cases happened. But particularly for me, Michael Brown struck home because his mother said something about his recent graduation. He had just graduated high school a couple of weeks before and was supposed to start trade school in a few days when he was killed. And then there was the fact that they, it set off the hands up, don't shoot controversy over whether he was running away or walking toward the police. So there was all that, but in the discussions, one of the people following uh, some of what was going on was a agent in New York, Marie Brown, who's one of the top agents for Black people, actually. And she encouraged me at the time to write a book proposal that tried to capture all of this conversation. And there was a lot of good writing as well. People were writing columns and op-eds and what have you. But it was mostly men writing at that time. So I wrote a proposal. I reached out to several friends, everybody on the call, at that time, or most people on this call with me today were people I reached out to back 10 years ago. And several said they would write for, I think 20 some people agreed to write at the time, or I identified copies who could buy the permissions. And somebody's sound is on.
There, got a crazy good cheeseburger frying and diet.
Okay, so
Somebody wants a cheeseburger.
right. Several people also agreed to give me a whole essay for the book proposal at the time. And Marie took the proposal and shopped it around New York, and nobody wanted to publish it. No one in the largely white publishing world was the least bit interested. So I put it away, and in the meantime, I did a couple of other books. And when George Floyd died in the middle of a pandemic, I really had not a whole lot else to do, and I started rewriting the proposal. And the other thing that I did when I wrote the first proposal, I forgot to say, is I had people tell me or write me a blurb about what their essay would be about if they weren't writing the whole essay at the time. So when I started rewriting it, I included those again. I found some more writers. I identified some more published pieces that we could buy. And I wrote my own essay, which I had not done the first time. And mine is about how young men with disabilities, particularly, are impacted by police brutalities. It turns out that they are the most likely to be shot, most likely to come in contact with police in the first place. So, and as many of you know, I adopted 4 sons, and 2 of them have special needs. One has autism, and one has learning disabilities that are less clear, a less clear diagnosis, let's say. So anyway, I completed the proposal. I never told Marie that I was rewriting it, and I called her like at the end of that summer and said, I've rewritten this proposal. Do you want to look at it? Will you represent me again? And mostly, do you think it'll sell? She said that she did want to represent it, and hell yes, it's going to sell now, because now they know what we're talking about. She said sometimes we as Black writers are so far out ahead of the white publishing world that they don't really understand the issue yet. And once people were flooding into the streets all over the world, they understood what we were talking about. So it sold almost immediately when she started representing it, partly because the editor was somebody that I had worked for before and I've written many assignments for. And she had moved to a new publishing house, and she was interested in it. So, and she asked them to ask for the proposal, basically. So they did, and they bought it immediately, and I started work on it. And when I started calling my friends, Angela's got receipts. She's got these things we wrote 10 years ago saying we do this. Or actually, when I started calling them again, it was like it had been 8 years since the first proposal. And I noticed that my earliest emails had gone out like 8 years before. So we started work. And the content of the book is, it's not just a bunch of women writing about how sad we feel when something like this happens. It's organized in themes, first of all, where the first section is about fear, how mothers fear for their Black sons the minute they know they're carrying one, basically. And then there's another section about actual interactions with police, where people have been arrested or stopped, or something occurred. There's a whole bunch of essays about the talk we as Black parents have to have with our sons before we send them out in the car or on the street or wherever. There's a whole section on education, because as parents of Black men in particular, it is hard to get them through school. And it's more that if we don't give them a good education, they have no chance at all on the street or any place else. So we make the decisions to move them from parochial school to private school. One of mine went to Quaker boarding school. One of them spent a summer at military camp. Whatever we have to do to get them out of there. And then, it moves through finally to healing and what we do about these issues, what kind of activism we have to have, and what kind of care we have to take of ourselves. And of course, there's a media chat where a lot of people talk about their actual experience covering these cases, for one, and how the media plays these tapes over and over and over and over again. And basically it tries to break up the topics into chunks that we can deal with. There's another whole section just on justice. I think that's just about it.
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
Is Mary Curtis? I haven't seen Mary yet.
Are
you here, Mary?
I'm here.
Oh, good. Well, I want to ask you because Mary came out with a podcast this week about this book, and I'm eager to hear. I haven't listened to the podcast yet, but I'm eager to hear her thoughts on what she wrote and what we should take away from it. Also, for the people who will use their 3 minutes, I'd like them to talk about how this relates to journalism too, so that those of us who are journalists on this call can benefit in that way as well. So, Mary, your 3 minutes.
Well, okay. I'll drop a link to the podcast, which Angela was a guest, as well as Lottie Joyner, who is a contributor as well. And I wrote on the race, privilege, and justice piece, and it's actually a reprint of something I wrote about the Trayvon Martin case and what chance did he have in court, because he was always the suspect. And when all of these things happen, of course, the person who's dead cannot speak. And in this case, we had the person who shot him, George Zimmerman, in the first post-shooting statement, refer to him as a suspect when he really was not. He was actually the victim, and George Zimmerman was the aggressor. He wasn't a police officer. He was a self-styled neighborhood watch person. But quickly, that took over the narrative. And even though the folks in the court said and nothing was racial, they allowed all kinds of testimony about the folks who had been, suspects in robberies, being Black and male. And this takes over. And it's also, I'm a mother of a son, and I write about how it is very difficult, it seems, for white folks, the folks on the jury, sometimes to put themselves in the place of the young person's parents, who really, it's their job, and Angela writes about this, to basically rehabilitate the dead person, because that narrative really takes over when they have the picture of, they don't have the picture of the person playing with siblings or being very human. And so, unfortunately, I wrote it a few years ago, but it's as relevant as ever because we see this happening again and again. And I'll put a link to the podcast, but I really liked it because Lottie and Angela bring in also historically that this isn't just George Floyd, or they talk about Mamie Till and Ida B. Wells and how this is a tradition of mothers of Black women fighting for justice for Black men who were lynched in this case. The bravery of Mamie Till, showing her son's mutilated body to show people what they did to her child, and it was a child. And my essay also talks about, Trayvon Martin was a teen, was a child, but so much of the coverage we always see is the adultification of young Black people, as though they are hulking, we saw this with Michael Brown as well, threats, as opposed to, say in Trayvon's case, a young man getting iced tea and Skittles. I think this is important for journalists because I think everybody goes into covering these with a certain amount of bias, and that has to be recognized and realized. We also have seen, not so much as now, but in history, the journalists taking the police reports as fact. And we've learned, of course, from videos and so much else, that that is not the case. We've seen that again and again, whether it's with George Floyd or with Mr. Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina, where the police report was nothing like the video. And I think that we need to take care with our editors and our colleagues to remind them, and this book is a good reminder, that in order to have journalism that's fair and honest, that we have to look at the complexities of cases like this and the fact that there is a racial element, when so often the gatekeepers don't want to push into the issue of race. I'll stop here. I think that's my 3 minutes, but it was really an honor to be a part of this book. Thank you, Angela, because it does hit so many aspects, and also what it does to African Americans, to see the porn of again and again all of these things happening, where often it doesn't make a difference in some ways, but it really is something that is very affecting. And I'm really happy that one of the essays contribution is from Darnella Frazier, the young woman who taped the George Floyd, to great detriment to her own well-being. But we don't really talk about that. So I'll pass it on to the next contributor.
Okay, how about Gayle Pollard, who's on the West Coast, and her essay is "No Justice, No Peace After Rodney King." Gayle, take it away, please.
Well, it's still morning in LA, so good morning.
Morning.
And I'm going to start from the perspective of a journalist. I was an editorial writer at the LA Times. Writing about police reform was part of my subjects. And I saw the news the night that Channel 5 KTLA showed the Rodney King beating. And so when I went in and I brought it up for an editorial, I was also surprised that there was no news story about it. And the editorial page editor was hesitant. And so he talked to the publisher, and the publisher said that he wanted to see it. Well, I mean, 30 years ago, we didn't have links or ways to see it very quickly. So I decided to start calling friends. I called a friend at the ACLU. She had the video, and she snuck it to me. I watched it with the publisher, and that gave the green light, not only for an editorial, but to news coverage. And that's where I think we as unapologetically Black journalists can make a difference in the newsroom. Andrea Ford, who some of you remember, a very strong sister, covered the story from the perspective of Rodney King. And then I covered the riots. I was out on the streets. The LA Times put everybody who was Black, whether you covered business or whatever, out on the streets. But when Angela talked to me about this, I really wanted to do two things. I wanted to humanize Rodney King, and I was glad she had given me an opportunity to talk about the times my husband had been stopped. Some of you know my husband, Mike Terry. He is a nice guy, and he's not the kind of person who is going to be loud. He has a long fuse, thank God. And so I started the piece with, I was in the newsroom, and my neighbor, Nedra Christmas, called me from across the street and said, LAPD has Mike in your driveway with their guns out and his hands up. And so I was on deadline, and I was grabbing my keys and my purse. And before I could get out of the newsroom, Mike called me and said he was okay. And I said, well, why did they stop you? And he said they asked, why did I pull up in this driveway? And he said, I live here, and he was able to show ID. Mike was stopped routinely in the early years of our marriage. Yeah, he covered the California Angels, and he'd be driving home at night, and he'd be stopped. But I also mentioned in the essay that on our third date, we were stopped coming back from the beach. And so around the same time, a close friend called me because her husband was going to work, and the police rolled up. He was in front of his house, proned him out on the sidewalk because they thought his car was stolen. So the LAPD had really bad relations with the Black community in LA, and this was very, very common. In order to humanize Rodney Brown, did I say Rodney Brown? Anyway, Rodney King, I found his daughter. I interviewed his daughter. And again, I called community leaders. I called people I had covered at the time, and somebody who could vouch for me. And it took a while to get her to talk. It took a while, but finally, when we did talk, I was really struck by the fact that she was a little girl, 7, when she saw the beating on TV with her sister, and they had no idea that this was their father. And then I was struck that she was going to 54th Street Elementary in South Central, and her last name was King, and kids would tease her. Oh, your daddy got beat down, blah, 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 blah. And she told me how her father got permission from the principal to come to the school, and he would play softball with the kids, and he would bring them snacks, and that he was a very involved father. And she made the point that, how do you think a child feels watching their father being beaten like that? So again, I want to thank Angela for the opportunity. I have read 80% of the essays, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. So thank you.
Thank you, Gayle. I think that, as I said in my comment, I think the Black men will really appreciate this love that's being expressed by the sisters here. But we also know that in the news media, not just Black men are not just victims. We have Sean Combs, we have R. Kelly, we have the thugs who were behind Donald Trump in New York at his rally. Now, where do they fit into the picture at what you all are writing, and your thoughts about how Black men are viewed? Who wants to take that one? No one? Anybody?
What's the first part of your question?
The question is, we have in the news media, and who's making news now in terms of Black men, not just Black men as victims and hardworking guys, but we have the Sean Combs, and we have the R. Kellys, and we have the guys who were behind Trump, who have been indicted at his rally in New York in the Bronx the other day. Where do they fit into the picture in terms of the perception of Black men and what you all are writing about Black men?
I don't know if anybody addressed that specifically, them specifically as producers of media, but several of the chapters touch on how the media creates an image of Black men that makes people fear them or allow them to say that they fear them or whatever.
Well, you don't have to limit yourself to what's in the book.
No, but I think they're just, in some cases they're just as guilty as the white people, in the images that they project most of the time, and I think that is a factor.
I
Okay.
think it's fascinating too that it's a different kind of stereotype. You see now so many political journalists running to Charlemagne the God to
Yeah.
get the voices of Black men and Black people. And, you know, the folks who were behind, if you look at that Bronx rally, there were very few Black people there in the crowd. And he has these folks there, these rappers, and he's actually brought a lot to him, mainly because he's pardoned them, like he pardoned Lil Wayne. He's kind of dangling pardons, and Trump is very transactional, so that makes sense. But the problem that the media makes is, you know, trading one stereotype for another. When Donald Trump says, you know, Black people relate to me because I'm a victim of the criminal justice system, and they
Right.
are too.
Yeah.
And they don't talk about, you know, him wanting to execute the Central Park Five and never apologizing, in fact, still insisting on their guilt. And I think that's a problem with the media, because they will take a simplistic, stereotypical narrative about Black folks and run with it. And so we still have a job to do. You know, as somebody, you know, who covers politics still, I find myself talking to folks about that, about your sources, and about not writing about these narratives as in Black men think this. I thought the Vice President Kamala Harris, when she was asked, what about this thing about Black voters and going to, and she said, listen, Black voters are not monolithic. They are citizens who have needs, and our party has to, you know, meet those needs and campaign to them for their vote like any other. So I'm finding that a little bit disturbing in some of the stories being written, as in Black folks this, Black folks that. And then, of course, on Fox News, you'll see Congressman Byron Donalds and Senator Tim Scott talking about another view of, you know, Black people who don't know enough to know that Democrats hate them. You know, it's disturbing.
Okay. All right. Which of the contributors who wants to be next? I see Anita
I'd like to
Samuels.
go next.
Oh, go ahead. Who?
Hi, this is Geri
Yeah.
Tucker.
Please.
And as always, I'm grateful to Angela for allowing me to speak my piece about justice for Black men. My particular essay focuses, like hers, on a person with disabilities, which is my son, who has autism spectrum disorder. And it starts off talking about the fear I felt when he was born before I knew he had any disabilities. I was in the hospital and listening to the news about Len Bias, the University of Maryland basketball player who died at, I think he was 20 years old, maybe 18. He had just gotten a full ride to the University of Maryland, and he died from a drug overdose. And it seems unrelated, but it's not, because I'm looking at a young man, a young Black man who had his whole life ahead of him, and it was cut short by one wrong decision. And I just sort of extrapolated, you know, here's my son being born in the district, the DMV area, Maryland, Virginia, Washington, in a community where violence was really high at that time, as it is now. And I'm like, what chance does he have as a young Black man in this area? And then when, you know, months later, actually, I guess it was 3 years later, I discovered he had autism. I'm like, this, you know, the decks are stacked against him. So my point of view is that young men with disabilities, what he experienced in school, what he experienced in college, they do tend to be targeted more than others. Just questioned because their behavior might be a little bit different, their affect might be a little bit different. And when they interact with police and other authority figures, there's a different expectation for them. We experienced it as he was a young student going through elementary and junior and high school. The expectations were lower. And my husband, Mike Tucker, and we insisted that teachers and school authorities make sure that they approached him as someone who was capable of excellence, that he wasn't put into special ed programs where he was segregated from what's a neurotypical child, that he was expected to excel just like anybody else, that he was going to be a college student, and he was. And I think education is one of the first places where young Black men are challenged by the system of racism, because the expectations for them tend to be lower. And it just sort of pervades as they grow older, that the expectations of society are different for them as well.
Okay, thank you, Geri. Who wants to be next? Jackie Jones.
Yeah, my story is about my son being stopped, a routine traffic stop, but his full name and his exact birth date were the same as a man who was wanted in another state on murder charges. And police thought they had their guy. And it was a Friday. There wasn't a there wasn't a large enough jail to hold people over for the weekend. So they had sort of like a night court, and the magistrate would go through all of the cases. And if you didn't make bail, if you didn't, if the case wasn't tossed, then you would go and spend the weekend at the state penitentiary and then be brought back to court on Monday for arraignment. And so I get a call about 1 o'clock in the morning from my son saying, I'm about to get locked up. They're going to send me to the penitentiary. He's trying to tell me what's going on. I get off the phone. I'm trying to find a lawyer. I'm trying to figure out what to do. And so then the story goes on from there, kind of what happened that night. And fortunately, at the last minute, the judge did order that the cops try to find the folder for this guy who was wanted. And they moved Tony back to the end of the night. He was the last case of the night. And about 15 minutes before he was to go back before the judge, the folder showed up, and the photo inside showed that it wasn't Tony. But it was, you know, sort of everything he went through in that experience, just sort of what growing up as a young Black man had been for him, starting when he was about 12 or 13 years old, when he went from being a kid, when he went in the store to buy snacks after school with his friends, to suddenly being a suspect, and trying to explain to him what that experience was like, how to conduct himself. You know, you don't have the talk just one time with your sons. You have to have it multiple times because their level of understanding shifts with age. So you have I had that first conversation with Tony around 12. You know, by the time this incident happens, he's 20. A lot of things happened in between, some of which are in the story about how cops stop you, what they stop you for. Sometimes they stop you just to mess with you. You're not always suspected of doing something wrong or accused. You know, he and his friends once were stopped because this cop just pulled up as they were walking down the street after playing basketball, and rolls down the window and points at him and says, I didn't get you today, but I'm going to get you. And then he drives off, and they're all looking at each other confused, like, what just happened here? You know, it's part of life. And how, you know, trying to explain to your son how you navigate that space, knowing that this is going to be an ongoing thing for much of his life until he's well into adulthood. Now, Tony's married, he's in his late 40s, he's got daughters. And while he has a conversation with them about how to conduct themselves, if, you know, the older one is now driving, if she's ever stopped by police, he feels like it's a different conversation because she's a girl. I don't necessarily share that viewpoint. I think we have enough evidence to the contrary, but certainly the assumption by and large is that because he's a Black man, there is always going to be something else, not just what we stopped you for, or that there is a reason to stop you just because. And I think that's sort of the thing that I want to emphasize. And I think that to your early question about how it relates to journalism is in how we tell these stories, the details that we do and don't know about people, what we can find out. While this didn't involve the police per se, many of us remember the late Mike McQueen. And when his son was killed, the initial story that came out made it look like he was this unemployed, undereducated alcoholic who took his own life, when in fact he had just been discharged from the Army. He was an Army Ranger. He had been accepted to college, but had not started the semester yet. He had broken up with his girlfriend, but that was his choice. And he had been out with friends earlier in the evening, having drinks. And so, of course, alcohol was in the system. But when they laid it out, it sounded as if he was someone very different than the Michael his family knew. And then when it finally all came to light, his roommate shot and killed him. And so that's a very different story, but it was very easy for that story to have just been lost in the shuffle, because the initial story was a little more than a brief. And it was later when the charge first came out and his lawyer just kind of pointed to all these things. It was true that he had alcohol in the system. It was true he wasn't working. It was true that he wasn't in school. And it's true he had alcohol in the system, but none of those things made him this unfortunate or pitiful character that the lawyer was trying to make him appear to be, or that the police were trying to make him appear to be. And so we have to be really careful when we get information as reporters to not just repeat what's told to us, but do the reporting behind it.
Here, okay. I see that Nichelle Smith had an observation and a question. Oh, Yanick, you wanted to say something?
Oh, I wanted to go next since I.
Okay, well, all right, I'm going to get to you, but let me get to Nichelle's question also about Black culture. What was your question and concern, Nichelle?
Okay, and thanks, Yanick, for yielding the floor for a second. My question, it's partly a question, partly an observation, because certainly everybody on this call, I think it's safe to say, is triggered just a little bit by talking about this. My brother and my nephew have both told me about incidents, and my nephew was even a police officer for a time. So he knows how they think, and he knows how to act around them, but this does not exempt him from being harassed. And my brother is over 50 years of age. This does not exempt him from being stopped on the street. So I share the anxiety, and I'm even, wringing my hands a little bit in angst as this recalls this for me. Certainly we want to defend and love and protect our Black men. But boy, there are times when I am conflicted otherwise, when I'm thinking outside of the family circle and thinking about the ways in which our society at large, culture at large, and particularly Black culture encourages misogynoir. I mean, the rap industry, which started for lots of great reasons and still has great messages to share, basically runs on misogynoir. You could argue about how that's controlled by forces outside of the Black community for another conversation. But there are so many ways in which Black women are targeted and sidelined. I mean, Shirley Chisholm, as an example, not getting the support that she needed from Black men. There are so many ways of conflict. I wondered if any of the writers struggled a little bit with that conflict. Again, acknowledging that our fathers, our brothers, our husbands are good men deserving of that defense. But then you look at how Black women are treated by Black men sometimes at large. I wondered how you all felt about that, and if you had any sense of conflict, how you dealt with it.
Okay, who wants to answer that one?
I don't recall anyone raising that to me or addressing it specifically. in their essays, partly because we were so focused on men for this topic. Of course, it's a problem, and if any of the contributors has a comment or felt something, please feel free to say so. But thank you for raising the issue.
Okay. All right, we'll go to Yanick now, who waited patiently.
Okay. Since a lot of young men in my life are interested in music, it is a topic I talk to them about in terms of the portrayal of women. I wanted to, since we're talking about a book, I just wanted to read the opening of my book, of my essay, and then I'll go into that a little bit. Our hearts jumped out of our chests as a cruiser pulled close to our bumper with blaring siren and whirling lights. My cousins and I froze as the officer's flashlight illuminated the interior of the car. The police were looking for a brown car with 4 Black males who had allegedly robbed a fast food joint. We were in the area and appeared to fit the description, except that I, the 4th passenger, was a teenage girl. To this day, we wonder about the outcome had I not been in the car. So I have a son, a godson, a ton of male cousins, 3 brothers, about more than a dozen nephews, 4 godsons. And so it's always been something on my mind. I was just in Ohio earlier this week for one of my nephew's graduations from high school. And we had a bit of a talk about, safety in school and different things like that. I think one of the things that the media fails to do is kind of look at the humanity and connect the dots to some of these things, because it spills over into a lot of other areas in the classroom, playground, basketball courts, jobs, and things like that. And I've witnessed all of that. I've had people in my life who have also been in the system. My brother also worked in a community correctional facility, so he worked with people who were in trouble. And I know even during COVID, I was concerned about men in my family being out there with hoodies on and masks and surgical masks to keep themselves safe from the virus, and what people, what would befall them, or what people would think when they're totally covered up just because of things that are going on. But I also had a line there always saying that even when it's crystal clear that they're smart, too many people look at them as smart asses. So, I just think it's something that doesn't really get covered. And I think a lot of times people feel that we are overreacting in terms of kind of the tentacles that racism reaches in other parts of our lives, whether they're, boys and men or young women and girls as well, too. So,
Wait,
so
what
those are
doesn't
some
get
of the
covered
things I was
enough?
looking at. Pardon me?
What doesn't get covered enough?
The parts, how this affects spills over into other parts of our lives, that it's not just, I think a lot of times, even when we're talking about, being stopped by the police, people, think that, here we go again, or that, there's some exaggeration. But we have a reason to be concerned, and we're concerned in different aspects of our lives. We're concerned about how young men and boys are treated in the classroom. And I teach at Howard, so I'm dealing with a lot of young men there also. And as I mentioned, I have a lot of young men in my life, but I've seen them, people in my family and other young men stopped all over the place, sometimes just walking down the sidewalk, and they're not in a vehicle just because they got out of school early or something, and they have the documents. And even though they have the documents, they're forced to sit on the curb until they call the school and verify it. And then they're clear, but it could go in a lot of different directions. So I think that, sometimes the humanism part about, our concerns about each other, that doesn't really, get covered. And I had a student who covered a case, I think it was in Minnesota, where a young man was stopped, and he had some run-ins with the law, so he kind of got out the car. But anyway, the upshot of it is he's a very tall man who could swim, who was found in just a couple feet of water, in shallow water, and they said they ruled the cause of death of drowning at the time. So his family, suspected foul play in that situation. And there's, stories on and on and on all over the place. So I thank Angela for pulling all of us in to write this book and share our stories and share our thoughts about these issues.
Thank you, Yanick.
I just wanted to briefly follow up on something Yanick said about your stop for nothing. I don't write about my son being stopped, but he was for driving a nice car in a nice neighborhood. It was his car. It was our neighborhood. It happened to be late at night. And the police wanted to search for drugs or guns or something. And he was very disciplined because, of course, he'd had the talk. But when he got home, he was just livid. And he hired a lawyer, even though it would have been less to, settle the ticket, because finally the police said, well, you went through the stop sign. He just made that up and gave him a ticket. And he fought it in court because he was livid. But I was so happy that he had saved that anger until he came home. But in that case, it was for nothing. It was, this car is nice. This neighborhood is nice. What are you doing here late at night? And he was like taking a break, driving around. And just briefly to touch on, Angela talked about Elijah McClain and that story, which resonated with so many people because he was such a sweet young man doing nothing pretty much. And I have a nephew who's autistic, who is sweet as can be, but he's a big grown, very big Black man. And if a police person would shout at him or something like that, he would totally react, that the police could say he was reacting in an erratic manner. This is scary stuff.
Okay, Sonya Ross had her hand up.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. And also thanks to Angela for coming forward with this very, very important conversation in a literary way, because that makes it more permanent, you see. I am actually grateful for the chance to talk about what you feel when death by cop, which is what I call it, death by cop reaches right into your family and snatches someone out of it, and there's no way to get justice, no justice for a long, long time. And in the case with my family, I'm talking about my cousin, who was an actor in Hollywood. His name was Ray Vitti, and folks of a particular generation would remember him from the roles he had in movies like Thank God It's Friday, Car Wash, Up in Smoke, from TV shows like That's My Mama. And there is value in pursuing justice for this man. And for so many years, my family's been silent about what happened to him. At the time, and for those who don't really know, the police responded to his apartment on a noise complaint in 1983. And that conversation they had with him, and he was home minding his business, but they said he was noisy. The neighbors had said he was noisy. And the conversation with the cops escalated. And the result was that my cousin was loaded into the back car by the LAPD and taken away allegedly for a psychiatric evaluation. And when they arrived at the station house with him, or the hospital, we're not sure, he was dead in the back of the car. And there are just so many questions around this. And how do you live with the questions? And what are the myriad ways that the questions just sort of nag at you and eat away at you for generations? Actually, because of Angela's book and this essay, my family is having conversations again about Ray and what you do to deal with it. Is it best to leave it alone, or is it something we really ought to ask the world for answers for? And should it just be us? If we, as a collective of people, as a race, why can't any of us ask what happened to Ray Vitti? Why can't any of us say, can you unseal his file so we'll know what happened to Ray Vitti? Can we say with any amount of accuracy or specificity that his death came shortly after the LAPD stopped using the chokehold, or supposedly stopped using the chokehold on people they were arresting? So I just said, maybe if we ask people to remember his name and ask people to remember the names of any of these thousands of Black men who died in police custody or at the hands of police, just to remember these people, no matter how many years have gone by. Just as there's no statute of limitations on death, on murder, there should not be a statute of limitations on when you can bring something like this up and have a conversation. So again, thanks to Angela and all of the brave ladies who are speaking up in this book. I do hope that everyone who reads this book comes away from reading it with a plan of action on some aspect of this, finding some way to do something personally themselves to try to make a difference for our men.
You're here. Okay. All right. We haven't heard from Anita Samuels or Sandra Long-Weaver. Who wants to?
I'll do it.
Oh, okay. Oh, wait a minute. I see a hand up here from Cynthia Robbins. Do you have a question, Cynthia? We can't hear you. Your volume is off.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I am driving. I'm going to a rehearsal, so I'm not going to be able to hear the end of this extraordinary conversation. But I just wanted to lift up 3 quick notes. First, thank you to Richard and Journal-isms and to Angela for writing this book, and to all of your colleagues who contributed to it, or editing this book, and all who contributed to it. Secondly, I worked as a public defender. So many of my clients were in fact involved in some way in the incident, which led to them being arrested and charged and tried and engaged with the police. I was undefeated in my jury trials. I had 1 hung jury and 10 not guilty verdicts, or 10 or so. And what I can say is that there was always a nuance to what happened. And I really embrace the comment that journalists must do their investigations, and the police account is rarely the full story, and so that cannot be reported as fact unless you have validated and verified. The third thing I want to say is that so there is this issue of defending Black men, even if they are involved, even if they are guilty. And then how does the system treat them? And then the final note I would like to make is that early in my exposure to journalisms, I shared with folks the story of a man, a former Black Panther named Veronza Bowers, who was convicted of murdering a park ranger in Oakland, let's see, at 50 some years ago. And he was incarcerated more than 25 years beyond the mandatory release date. They're on specious evidence, which has been, a lot of which has been later discredited. So it's quite possible he did not even commit the murder. Nevertheless, as a model prisoner, even his prison warden stood up for him to be released. But because he was convicted of killing a police officer, he was treated as even worse than any other murderer. And the Fraternal Order of Police would mobilize at any time he was having a parole hearing, and mobilize for him to be held, even as the parole commission on 2 occasions voted for his release, one of which his family was waiting outside the prison, and yet they turned him back and he was held for decades more. I just wanted to report that as Martin Luther King quoted, the history of the arc of history is long, but it does bend toward justice. And last month, or the month before, I think it was last month, after 51 years of incarceration, Veronza Bowers was finally freed. And largely it was because Black and other women, as well as white people, stood up for him to be treated fairly.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. Anita and Sandra, which of you wanted to go first?
Go first.
Okay, Anita.
Okay. So my contribution is more on the emotional side, which I don't mind saying that I am. It's called That Lump in the Throat That Never Goes Away. And it's that physical manifestation of anxiety every time you see something negative on the news about Black men and Black boys. And I get it all the time. And of course, I get it as it relates to my son as well, whom I've written about many times. And initially, when Angela first asked me about this, my son was in the Army. He had just gone into the Army for not 4, but 6 years. And I had lots of anxiety about that. And when we did the blurb, I said, well, maybe he's safer in the Army than he is out on the street. And I answered that question in my essay. But what had come up around the same time was that we were coming back from a family reunion, my father's family reunion, in a really small town called Fruitland, Maryland. And we got stopped and for speeding. And I was in the car, my grandkids were in the car, his wife was in the car, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, I could just see the headlines if something happens. It happens so quickly. The cop, he seemed like a sweet elderly cop, but he was right up next to us in seconds. And next thing I know, my son is pulling out his registration and license. And meanwhile, I'm like, oh my God, Dante Wright. Okay, what do I do? What can I do? I can't do anything. If I reach for anything, we could all be killed. And it was just the panic. And writing about it just reminded me of the times that I'm not with my son. And I'm like, wow, not that he would ever tell me, some of our sons, they keep these secrets and stuff, but I did notice on our way to the family reunion, he was driving pretty fast. And I was like, okay, we got away this time with a $180 ticket. But I was the only one in the car who was panicked. They weren't aware of it. And when I talked to him later, I said, well, were you nervous at all? Were you scared? And he was like, no. I was like, believe me, I was scared for all of us in the car because you just never know. And his response was like, well, I think I was scareder in Iraq than I am of getting shot, but he changed his mind and he has daughters, I don't know if he would change his mind then, but I do hope for his sake that he is not speeding these days. Shane just likes to get where he wants to go. But this was really a great opportunity. And like I said, I've written about my son before, but I'd never written about him as an adult. And I still get that lump in my throat every time I see the news and every time we talk about anything that's happened recently in the news to a Black man. And, as I say in the title, it will never go away.
Yeah. Okay, Sandra. Oh, unmute, please.
Okay. Can everyone hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
So my essay focused on having a talk with my son also. And it happened, he was pulled over by the police. At the time, I was an editor at the Inquirer and very upset. What upset me was he was with friends in a nice car and they were home following their first semester in college. So here were these 4 young college men, so to speak, getting together after their first semester experiences to talk about what was going on. And they were allegedly pulled over for, there was a car similar that was involved in a robbery. And not only were they pulled over, but it was cold. It was the winter. There was snow on the ground. They were all forced to get out of the car and lie flat on their stomachs in the snow, which, was just over the top. And when they were able, no one was arrested, but the experience traumatized the young men. And one of the young men was so traumatized, he was not able to return to college. He spent time in a psychiatric unit and they were all good friends. But over the years, I re-interviewed my son about this whole incident because I wrote about it when it happened, when I was still an editor at the Inquirer, and talked about this is, should not have happened. Should not have, why did this have to take place? But when Angela asked me to do this, I re-interviewed my son to say, well, whatever happened to your friend? And he said, Mom, I don't know. He never came back to school. We lost touch. And what really struck me was he said this was a young man who lived in a tough neighborhood. Both of his parents were unfortunately addicts. So he never had a lot of support trying to go to school to be successful, but he was able to get a scholarship to attend school. And not going back, he just looked at it as, I can't get a break. No matter what I do, the police are coming after me. And I just think, and my son felt like, it was a shame. But what also struck me when I re-interviewed him was that this was a friendship between men that could have developed into something, but it was lost, all because of that moment, that trauma that they experienced at that time, of lying on that pavement, which he still recalls, and but never followed up with that conversation. And I wondered, well, what happened to his parents? I don't know. I didn't follow up with the parents at that time. I wanted to put pressure on the Philadelphia police for harassing my son, and tried to get answers, but never really got full answers about it. But it struck me, it's, more than 20 years later, and the trauma was generational. Here was a young man who just felt, he had that opportunity, but it was gone. He was not going to get a break from anything. So as journalists, I think the stories are not complete unless we talk about the impact on families as well. What impact does it have on the family, on the neighborhood, on the community? And what is it that we need to be thinking about that affects our communities, the way the police are treating us? Is, how can we push back on the what we need to think about? So I'm going to end it there, but it was that friendship that really struck me. When you have Black men who are good friends, and he does have other friends from that era and even earlier in his life, that they're still friends. But that was a friendship that he regrets did not continue, and one that I feel should have been able to continue, and that young man should have been able to be successful in life.
Richard,
Okay,
Ingrid is on as well. She doesn't have her camera on, but she's on the call.
Who is?
Ingrid Sturgis.
Oh yeah, Ingrid. I don't see your.
She was on my second screen.
Yeah, she was on the second screen. Okay, Ingrid, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yep, I'm here. Hold
Okay.
on.
You want to tell us a little about your chapter and what you have to say
Yeah.
about?
Well, mine looked at the impact of Black men getting stopped and frisked and how it impacts their lifelong, affects them throughout their lives. So I looked at my nephew, my cousin told me about how when he lived in Newark, he was regularly thrown up against the wall and frisked. And then my nephew told me about how he went to take the subway and he was arrested or held because they said he did not have a subway pass when he did. And so these things happen regularly. And I looked at the numbers, and 95% of the people getting stopped and frisked in New York were Black or Hispanic, and 24% of the people were Black or Hispanic. So the number of people being stopped and held, arrested, and frisked is larger than the number of Black and Hispanic people that live in New York City, for example. Same thing is true for Chicago. And so then I looked at how it impacts the young men who get stopped. So a lot of them get stopped in middle school and high school, right? So they don't know what their rights are. They may or may not have to talk with their family. But what happens is that it impacts their learning. It impacts whether or not they finish school. It impacts whether or not they go to college. It impacts their mental health. And so all of these stop and frisk incidents are really taking a toll on men. So many young men are holding back. they're not exploring their full potential because they've been in these incidents that happen over and over and over again. So they learn that they're not safe. And not being safe means that they may not reach their full potential. So we have a whole generation of young Black men and women, as we said before, who never reach their potential because they're impacted by this kind of violence on a daily basis. And that's what my chapter was about. So I just looked at how they're impacted, how stop and frisks hurts the whole society, not just Black men.
What suggestions do you have for the journalists in the room about how to deal with this?
Well, like everybody said, we have to challenge the police reports, number one, because a lot of times those reports, those police reports follow these young men, because once you get arrested, the record has to be expunged or it doesn't go away. It stays on your record somehow. And now, right now, we also have the digital impact, right? So we have surveillance and we have stop and frisk that may look at your digital profile. And so you don't always see this happening and you don't see the results of it. So we have to challenge how policing is done. We have to challenge how they're obtaining the information about each person that's stop and frisk and whether or not you can release it so that it doesn't follow you for the rest of your lives. We also have to look at the impact of these incidents on the education of young men who get stopped this way and feel like they can't continue, or even to look at how it shortens a life's expectation because you're afraid of going out into the world because you don't know when these incidents are going to happen to you over and over again.
Richard, if I could just jump back in with an observation based on what Sandra said, and Yanick, I'm sorry, not Yanick, Ingrid. I'm usually saying Yanick and Ingrid at the same time. What Ingrid is saying, I don't think there is enough understanding of the long-term impacts of this police behavior on not just the young men, but all of the people in their orbit. Everybody gets affected, and it manifests in so many ways. You know, I'm speaking specifically about my cousin, for example. His two of his aunts, I was in contact with regularly through family, and one of them, deep into her 90s, was regretting that she told him to stay in LA for movie roles or for his career. And if she had thought for 1 minute that the police would kill him, she says, I wish I had told him to move to New York. She was having this conversation with me well into her 80s, well, maybe late 80s, almost 90, and had tears in her eyes talking about this. So part of what makes it hard is having to repress all the feelings. You know, it is still salient to talk about these police killings, these police detentions, this police behavior when it plays out on our loved ones, and the dangers of repressing how you feel about it too.
Absolutely.
Right. Some of the writers talk about these young men don't even want to leave home at night or get driver's license or have cars or whatever. Think about the impact of that over time. Is that they're not going to go to night school, or they're not going to take jobs that they could have that just because it's a late shift, whatever. But and they certainly can't party, and they feel it. So one of the things you asked about what journalists can do. One, journalists need to read this book because it's not just us emoting. Our writers really did a lot of original reporting for the book. There are interviews in here. Gayle Pollard, Terry's interview, Patrice Gaines interviews the mother of Jonathan Farrell, who was basically shot for ringing a doorbell because his car had broken down. There's a lot of data. The Washington Post had to create its own data bank of police shootings after Michael Brown was killed because they figured out that the government really didn't have any statistics. So several of the writers used that database to make a point. In my article, I found out that about half the people who are shot by police in this country have a disability of some sort. One man was shot while he was trying to reach for a sign that says, "I'm deaf, I can't hear you." But there are numerous cases of people with autism being shot. And two other writers, or one of my other writers in the disability section, was a professor, and her son was at another college and was missing overnight. His dad was out looking for him and with a friend, and they didn't find him. Police finally found him back in his apartment, and he was shot within seconds of when the police arrived. So he probably wasn't doing anything, and he wasn't expecting them. So that, there's just so much here. And I was moved by and triggered almost every day when an essay would come in. But I learned so much throughout the whole process. So I hope people will, and particularly look at the media section where we talk about the impact on reporters of having to hear these cases every day and go out and cover them. The impact of watching these videos over and over and over again. None of that can be good for us, but we've got to get to these stories and make sure that the public knows exactly what transpired. We also talk about how the media always grabs the picture of the guy with his hoodie and his gang symbols or tattoos or whatever, but never the graduation photo, never the prom photo where he's sitting next to, standing next to a girl with a matching dress. We don't see those kind of images. We don't put them in the paper. So if your newspaper or website or whatever is covering one of these cases, ask somebody, why were you using this photo? Why are we doing this? Why did you bring up his school suspension? It has nothing to do with the day he was shot. Those kinds of things that the media fosters this, really. And it's by creating this image of Black men as dangerous and scary, they are part of the problem. So.
Okay. Annalise has her hand up. Welcome to the session, to the roundtable.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
What is? Tell us what your question or concern is.
My question is, I just would like to reiterate, this is absolutely so triggering. I'm sure we all have many stories. Thank you for bringing this forward. I'm wondering what people are doing collectively, journalists, to address their own mental health issues in an organized way, because this is beyond, I think, the capacity for individuals to deal with this systemic trauma, and to have the expectation that they can just continue to push through and put one foot in front of the other when this, this maelstrom of anti-Blackness is always at the forefront with these actions by the police. Are you all, does NABJ have any component that deals with, the high functioning depression that must come along with all of these kinds of horrific events and reporting?
I don't know. We asked NABJ if they could send somebody here, but they didn't. So I don't know. They do have a Black male task force, so maybe they know something. But I don't know. Nichelle has her hand up, and so does Pam Porifon. Okay, Nichelle, and then Pam.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to something that Angela had to say about what newsrooms could do, and tell a little bit of a story of my time with USA Today. I'm an investigative journalist, formerly with USA Today, and I was there when we were covering George Floyd. I had to constantly remind my colleagues that as the only Black female investigative editor on their team, I didn't really take kindly to jokes about chokeholds and pinch holds. And as we were analyzing the situation, I had to continually remind them of the humanity of people, and just wasn't about analyzing the number of chokeholds in the country and where chokeholds were more likely to be done. And that all of this was amazingly triggering for me. And though I don't think they really got it, I think that I was able to do more to convince them and Gannett overall when I held a session after Breonna Taylor's death. It was 6 or 7 months afterwards, and we Black women within Gannett Company, USA Today in particular, came together to talk about how we were going to cover this going forward, because we did not necessarily like the art. We appreciated all the coverage coming from our sister paper in Louisville, but we didn't necessarily always like the arc. And I remember debating with one editor who wanted to talk about, oh, well, the story that you asked somebody to do for Black History Month, well, she really wasn't a first responder. She had moved off the team, and I was like, and this diminishes her life. How? So I found myself in those types of conversations. We came together as a group, and the idea was to have an in-house meeting with activists, civil rights activists, and women who ran different organizations within the company. There was some within the country, someone from Highlander Group, someone from Ronald McDonald's House, all of these women coming together around the country. And I even invited my hairdresser as well, because I wanted a cross section of women to talk about what the media could do better to cover Black women who are in these situations so similar to Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin and the men that we're discussing today, in order to humanize them. And we had an amazingly profound 1.5-hour session, Zoom call for the entire company, where we discussed the media not talking to the family, the media taking points of view of the police for granted, the media not humanizing people. And my colleagues were at first defensive about this. Some told me that their inclination was to push back and say, look at all we've done to cover Black death by cop adequately. But then they really began to listen as these women told their stories. So I can sum up by saying some sort of forum like that, get Black women together, get Black men together in the newsrooms. And I didn't ask anybody's permission. I just proceeded until apprehended. And then people were like, well, what are you doing? We want to get in on this. So grab your groups and make the most of the power that you can have by number in the newsroom to talk about these issues. We did affect coverage. We were able to humanize her. And when we went to front page stories at USA Today, we were able to get some of these other women to comment and make her more human than she had been portrayed to that date.
I just want to say that we will be taking this discussion to NABJ. We're going to be on the author showcase. I've got about a dozen contributors who will be with me for my panel session.
Very good. Okay. Pam Purify was next.
Right. I wanted to address Annalise's question about the mental health situation. We do have a mental NABJ Wellness Task Force that was recently founded, and Dr. Courtney Alston Lemon is its founding co-chair. And once a month on a Wednesday, there are these sessions that are quite wonderful, talking about these issues on mental health and whatnot. So, and it's for everybody that's in NABJ. And I think that it, one of its reasons for being organized is to help with those issues. So, and it has a Facebook group. So just look on Facebook under NABJ Wellness Task Force, and you'll find it.
I think it's important for us to talk about these things more often, and also on a personal level, to seek mental health if we need it, because sometimes it's still stigmatized among us, even though we know that, we should do it and we should take care of our mental health just like we take care of our teeth by going to the dentist and on and on and on. We started a series at Howard called Reporting While Black. And in the process, the first one we did was during some of the protests during the pandemic, when the number of journalists were getting arrested and things like that, even though they had the credentials. And we also did one on covering 9/11. We've done a number of them. But one of the things that has come out of that is that a lot of people, even though they're just moving through and they don't even realize the trauma that they're experiencing personally, even when we did the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and people who were on the ground covering that, they said until they sat down and had that discussion 2 decades later, that they just now realized that they had been traumatized by that. So if you're doing it on a daily basis or weekly basis or more often, we really have to be more intentional about talking about it and addressing it. And I'm glad NABJ is doing, more about that, but in local chapters and small groups, on your own, with your friends, with people in your newsroom, as Nichelle mentioned. I just think that any way that we can do that, we should try. And we also try to address that with our students too, to let them know exactly what they're running into. And that's one of the reasons we started the series as well.
Good. I've got a question because since there's so many academics, people from academia on the call, the people have suggested that more needs to be done to assess the impact on families and what happens later in life as a result of some of these experiences that Black men have with the police and other authority figures. And I just wonder, are there studies that have been done that you know of, or people who have looked into this that we might contact to get more information?
Yeah, in my article, I list some of the scholarship on what happens to people who are arrested or who are arrested or targeted by police. So there is some data about what happens to the people who encounter these kind of incidents. And
also the Dart, go ahead.
I can share that with you.
Thank you.
Also, the Dart Center at Columbia has programs specifically for journalists.
Right. Good point. Okay. All right. Well, let's do our introductions here. And as we introduce, I'll call on the people who haven't said anything and see if they have any observations to make as they introduce themselves. So I think, Anna, at least you I don't think you said, told us your background and all that good stuff.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annalisa Bruner, and I am a Tulsa race massacre descendant.
Oh.
My book, The Nation Must Awake, came out in 2021 for the centennial of the 1921 race massacre. It is a compilation of my great-grandmother's original reporting, Mary Elizabeth Jones Parrish. And she is the original reporter and chronicler of the events, and speaks eloquently, writes eloquently about what she observed, but I think, in my mind, more important, what she herself experienced, and her analysis is very much on point. And I am able, when I look at that book, to look at her writing, see the moment in history where she with her 7-year-old daughter steps out of the building and runs to safety in the right direction just by chance amidst a hail of bullets. And it's the moment in time where my future existence was determined. And the book contains not only my afterword, but a foreword by Dr. John Hope Franklin. So I'm very proud of that. I came into this at Dr. Rice Lamb's invitation. So I was not aware of this before, but I'm thrilled and privileged to be on this call and to hear this. And as everyone, have my own experiences of male family members being stopped by the police in an uncalled for manner. And I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I will not take up too much time here, but this is important work, and thank you for doing it.
If there's anything you want to put in the chat room about that, your thoughts, please feel free. Okay. Michelle, my cousin, who's in the health field, and she was going to be on Facebook, but she transferred over to Zoom. I just wonder whether you have any observations, thoughts, if you can hear us.
Who did you ask?
I was asking whether you had any observations or thoughts to share from what you've heard. Well, we're having communication difficulties there. How about Elliot Francis?
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, Elliot Francis, former anchor, reporter, run 5 different cities for about 45 years, currently host producer of Now with Elliot Francis, streamed live over YouTube, Facebook. Another worthwhile discussion today. It's, I don't
What
think
did you take away from it, Elliot?
You know, we don't, I always think we don't hear enough of this type of defense from women. Some men might even say we've gone into a period where men are in some ways becoming discriminated against. I don't know if I'd support that, but I think we don't hear these voices often enough. And so I was very glad to hear this morning, having experienced some of this in my youth, and trying to help my son avoid any of the pitfalls that have approached and fallen some of our other Black men. It's something that's always on the top of your mind, and something that that needs to be talked about more. So, bravo, ladies. Thank you.
Thank you. Hazel Trice-Edney.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Richard, for an excellent panel once again. And congratulations to Angela for this great book. I am Hazel Trice-Edney, editor-in-chief of the Trice-Edney Newswire, president CEO of Trice-Edney Communications. I also teach multicultural media history at the Kathy Hughes School of Communications at Howard. I say hello to Dr. Yanick and Professor Ingrid, who are also on. I just want to say this. Sonya Ross used the words that stick in my spirit right now when she said plan of action. You know, from my perspective, having covered many of these issues pertaining to Black men being killed by police and Black women, and actually, you know, covering the Mike Brown riots, the Freddie Gray riots, the Trayvon Martin riots. I'm old, but I'm still, whenever there's a riot, I'm like attracted to it. I gotta go cover it. You know, but my critique of those of us who are still journalists is that I don't think we hold the police accountable enough. I don't think that we press them enough, and that should be a part of our plan of action. We talk about the talk. That's a plan of action. We, you know, talk about public policy, but you know, are we pressing for more public policy? You know, from the police, from city councils, you know, on local levels, from Congress, you know, et cetera. And I think, you know, in critiquing myself as well, I'm always just on the ground, you know, covering the part where the blood and gore is, because people want to know what happened. But the plan of action has got to be foremost if we're going to move this conversation forward, and if we're going to make change in our communities.
Okay. I'll point out also that one of the complaints against the Biden administration has been that they haven't passed the John Lewis Act and these other measures that people say they want. but they're all been blocked in Congress. And so this is not a situation that exists in isolation. I mean, one problem is linked to the other. And so I just want to point that out. Bonnie Newman Davis. Hey there, Bonnie.
Hey, yes, I'm here. How are you?
Fine, good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to see you too. What
Okay,
are we
please
doing?
introduce yourself and tell us
Oh.
what observations you gleaned from this conversation.
Oh, okay. My name is Bonnie Newman Davis, and I am a journalist, journalism educator, and author. My book is Truth Tellers, The Power and Presence of Black Women Journalists since 1960. It came out in 2022, and several of the ladies who are involved in this work also were involved in my book. And when I say this work, I mean Angela's book. It's definitely a book that's needed, very necessary. It sheds light on so many issues that many of us were aware of, but didn't know about in terms of the detail and the fact that it was mentioned during this discussion how many Black men who have some sort of disability in their records of arrest and encounters with police, all of that, I had no idea. So I have the book. I'm looking forward to reading it and hopefully have Angela here in Richmond, Virginia, to talk about it with our audiences, because we've certainly had many young men to have similar encounters with police. So I just applaud everybody in terms of the involvement. I applaud Angela for pursuing this book project over so many years, and happy to be a part of it. I did write a blurb for the book, and I want to hear more about it during the author's showcase. I'll be working with the showcase this year, Alexis Yancey, and maybe even taking it over next year. I'll just put that out there so y'all be prepared. And Richard, don't be harassing me because I'll be needing your help.
Okay.
But
okay, Bonnie, let's move on to Karen Dunlap.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Karen Brown Dunlap. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Former president of the Poynter Institute. I want to commend.
Book, yes.
Gotta hold the book up, Angela. I want to commend Angela and all the contributors for the book. I want to say, obviously from a writing perspective, it's not only the. There you go, Sonya. It's not just the well-researched stories. It's not just the good reporting and the personal interest. But a little bonus is that there's so many references to take you to other places, to music, to videos, to other articles or books. Just it's a whole treat in itself, the other places that you can go from this book. I think my concern is I listened to the discussion, but I still have that concern of how to get around editors who say we've done that, we've already done that. And you have the richness of the book, but how do you, I hope we can keep pushing so that day to day, week to week, as things happen, we are able to make the argument that you've done that, but you haven't done this. So thank you, group.
Thank you. Gloria Minot.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. Wonderful session as usual. I am sitting here basking in the stories I'm hearing and thinking about my son, who is a Black man, who told me once that he was traveling on the highway, was stopped by the police for no obvious reason. And when he reached for his credentials, well, he had to make sure that he explained why he was reaching in his pocket. And he was so shaken up by the experience that I just couldn't assuage his stress and just agony over what happened. So I'm sitting here as a Black woman with a Black son, Black grandchildren, both male and female, and wonders aloud what's going to happen to them, because from one day to the next, you never know what will happen. Again, a wonderful session, and thank you all. And I see some books that I keep saying I'm going to get. I am going to get some of those books. Richard, I'll get in touch with you and we can work out the details.
Sounds good. Sounds like a plan. Okay, Roger Witherspoon. Roger, are you there? Okay, stepped away. Greg Morris.
Hi, I'm Greg Morris. I'm an assistant journalism professor at Hunter College, and have all these thoughts resonating from the discussion and because of Angela's book. And so I'll, to try to make a long story short, I started experiencing harassment by the police, violence, all sorts of fightings, starting in grammar school in Chicago. First time I was ever had to confront a police officer because I accidentally tripped over a student in a classroom and had an argument with other students. And so the teacher decided I had to go talk to a police officer that happened to be in the vicinity. So I've had friends shot, killed, beaten up. So what I've learned to do is some of the things I do are a little bit self-destructive. I do a lot of blogging. I've gotten people fired, or no, I didn't get them fired. I got them to leave from Hunter College. I carry a tape recorder and pictures wherever I go. My main goal is to make a contribution to the cause, and I do that by blogging. I have a two books in progress, and I've listened to other people's discussions, and I'm sort of motivated by them. But at this point in my life, I need to do something more, regardless of the risks. I don't take stupid risks, but I'm willing to take more risks. And I've had a decent reputation, at least at Hunter CUNY, for targeting bullies and racists and everything else. And so I'm really fired up by this experience. And right now I'm going to shut up because I don't want to say anymore. But it's really a pleasure meeting everybody. And I really appreciate this. I can't tell you how much. And Richard, again, this is really, really great. And Angela, you need to, I hope there's a GoFundMe project or something that starts pouring money into what you're doing, what you've done with that book, because you're on top of something that I think needs to be spread. And you've been a journalist, you are a journalist, and that's it. I've said enough. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. Okay, Jackie Green, our producer.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to say thank you to all of you who participated today. It was a very good program, another great program. I'm sure that when we post it, we'll get a lot more comments and all that Richard can send out to you. And it's a reminder that there's a lot of work still to be done. But also, too, that as Cynthia said earlier, that when you're reporting in particularly challenging situations, it's the nuances that's not in the police report that you have to look for and you have to challenge there. So I thank you all for participating. Look for our next program.
Okay, very good. See, Andy Mayer is here, who helps out with collecting some material for us. He was originally on Facebook, but he switched over. Andy, do you want to say anything about your impressions or anything else?
Well, do you hear me, Dick?
Yes.
Okay. You've done great work for a long time. I've been with you off and on for a decade, but the point is that from what I've heard, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get in at the beginning. I had some technical problems, but from what I heard today, it just accents the fact that, you know, this needs to be presented in this format and certainly further nationwide, it is an issue that I think needs to be brought up, especially as we're approaching conventions and we're approaching the meat of the election, and especially on the basis of what happened this past week with prospective nominee for the GOP, right? And some of the things that have been said need to be brought to the attention of both parties and third parties, because it's a nationwide issue and it's not just a party issue. So I thank you for presenting this, and as always, you're on top of the issue.
Thank you, Andy.
Pleasure
Okay.
to work with you. Pleasure to work with you.
All right, thank you. Oops, I just lost somebody here. I was going to go to John Watson.
Hi, Richard. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. I was a journalist in New Jersey for 21 years, and I tried to implement some of the ideas that were expressed here today. But the thing that most impressed me from today's discussion is something my mother, who was raised in Alabama and came to New Jersey during World War II, she told me when I was 12, when you're in big trouble, find a colored woman to help you.
Right.
Today, that is absolutely true. And I use the term colored woman with a great deal of respect and affection. And I thank you all for your contributions to that book.
Thank you, John.
Here, here.
Let's see. Pam, did you tell us more about what you thought about everything and who you are?
I'm Pam Purifoy. I'm a public relations and marketing professional. I'm the co-chair of the NABJ Media Related Task Force. And I also have a podcast called Remixing Politics and Culture with Pam that I put on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock, most Sunday nights if I'm not too tired. I had a chance to listen to the podcast that you sent, Richard. I listened to it twice, and
Mary Curtis's podcast.
Pardon?
Mary Curtis's podcast.
Yes. And found it quite fascinating and interesting. And I recall here, I live in Durham, North Carolina, and I recall a period of time where there were parents of autistic children, the Caucasian parents of autistic children, that had come up with some type of specialized card that they would give to their children to have on them when they would go out in public and what have you, to identify themselves as being special needs and that type of thing. So I thought of that immediately in listening to how prevalent it was of those people with neurodivergent special needs were being approached by police and what have you. And I agree, Black women we always seem to be saving the world all the time. Period.
Here. Michael Days.
Good afternoon. This has been a great conversation. I'm happy to be here just to listen. You know, I think most of you know that my wife, my spouse of 42 years, is Angela Dodson. So I've been championing her on this book for how many years, Angela? About 10 years now.
10 years, right?
To this point,
You've heard it all.
But I will confess that I'm finally kind of triggered by the conversation. It sort of took me back to when we were living in Princeton. I don't know, 40 years ago, maybe. And we had one car and a little Volkswagen Rabbit. And I was working, we moved to Princeton largely because I was working in Philly and she was working in New York at the time. And people said, oh, you should probably live in Princeton. Well, living in Princeton was a bit of a nightmare for a Black man. Trying to pick up his wife at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning at the Princeton Junction, Princeton train station. And some of y'all on this call appear to be old enough to remember when we did not have cell phones. And so there I am living in a place in a town. We're living in a town where everybody had sort of high-end cars, and we did not. We had a Volkswagen Rabbit. So one evening, this cop pulls me over, and it wasn't the first time I was pulled over because I was traveling at all kinds of hours. He says, "You stole this car."
Oh my
I said, officer. And I always tried to use wit and a little bit of humor to try to keep myself alive. He said, I said, officer, this is Princeton, New Jersey. Who steals a rabbit in Princeton? And he looks at me. I said, look, my wife is at the train station and she's there alone. You see what time it is. You can do with me what you want. But let me, would you please follow me to the train station so she can take the car and then you can do what you want with me. So he does follow me to the train station. That's got to be 5-7 miles.
Which is out of his jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's a good point. Out of his jurisdiction. Angela gets in the car and he just takes off. And that wasn't the first time that happened, but that was about the time where we decided we need to move someplace else. And so we did. But I only tell that story to say this, I'm no longer a young person. I'm no longer even a middle-aged person. This happened a long, long time ago. And so this stuff has been going on forever. And I'm thrilled to hear the conversation today. And I'm thrilled that my wife did not give up on this terrific anthology and moved ahead and finally got it published. I would also add that somehow I ended up coming out of retirement to head the new NABJ chapter in Philadelphia. The old chapters took a left turn, and many of us didn't think that was the right turn to take. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Michael. Sharon Farmer with her camera. Oh, we can't hear you. Unmute.
Working the camera is one thing. Working the computer and all these things down here is another thing. I feel overly challenged on something. But I understand. So I'm trying to be a modern woman, a little difficult. I have been ready for the revolution since the 70s when I went to Ohio State University. Nothing's changed, y'all. And every time some doggone newspaper, I don't care if it's a Washington Post, the New York Times, or even the Afro, we are still not getting to the meat and the heart of the matter. What would I like? I would like people to figure out how to devote at least an hour a day, if not an hour a day, hey, a few days a month, to concentrate on the mess that's still going on. All of us can think back to our college days about what happened to us and our friends. Time is running out. I feel stressed for time because I'm shorter distance from 100 than I was. The idea of how long Black women live is terrible. So if I want to get to 100 and nothing's changed, what good are any of us? All of us have to pitch in some more harder and give the other people hell for all the stuff that still goes on. I rest my case.
Okay, Crystal Chancellor.
Thank you, Dick, and thank you to everyone who was part of the conversation, particularly Angela and all the contributors. I really admire all the women who add their voices and their stories to this book. I particularly wanted to just echo some of the things that Nichelle Smith had said. I really so admire what she did in the USA Today newsroom. And I think the thing that she said that I also just wanted to spotlight is the need for newsrooms to really hear and be part of these discussions. I think I'm really glad that this is going to be part of NABJ so that other journalists who are not here, particularly younger journalists, younger editors and producers, can be part of that change and that conversation that needs to happen. So that's really what I take from it, that I'm encouraged by the fact that the conversation will live beyond this discussion today. But thank you everyone for your contributions, and Dick for bringing us all together.
Thank you, Crystal. Glad you made it. Good. Deborah Berry.
Hi, everybody. I'm Deborah Berry. I'm a national correspondent with USA Today. I tend to cover a lot of these issues, especially disparities and civil rights. So that said, I very much appreciate this conversation and this discussion and the powerful stories that my sisters shared. I am looking forward to the book. I agree with Chris and what Andrew said about this discussion being need to be held in other places.
Oh, no,
I really think that it should, like Chris said, be in some newsrooms. We need more editors like Michelle did a few years ago. We need more editors to hear it, more reporters to hear it. We need more reporters and editors to do something about it. So I hope you can take this on the road, if you will, and make sure other folks are part of this discussion. Thank you for hosting.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Lisa Cox. Lisa, are you there? You see your picture? Okay, she must have stepped away. All right, that's it. We're 4 minutes under the limit, which is good. I want to thank everybody for participating. We will put this on YouTube and also print out the chat room comments, and which will be distributed to everybody on the call. If we don't have the email address, please put it in the chat, and then we will take it from there. So thanks everyone, and we'll hope to see you next month, and be well.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela and contributors.
Thank you, Richard and Angela.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, all the contributors.
Bye, y'all.
Hey, there's Mike. Hey, my man, Mike.